Okay, well, it's gradually getting dark. The sun is gradually going down. It's not a bad night, really. The bugs aren't even all that bad at the moment. I'm grateful for that. I like to be able to sit out here and just enjoy the fresh air and listen to the sound of the birds and the crickets and the frogs and everything, all the different sounds. I just really enjoy it. I'm not feeling very good right now. I have, of course, my teeth are bothering me and stuff, and I just don't feel well. That's how I just generally don't feel well. But anyway, that'll pass, I'm sure. I've said a prayer about it, and I've left it in God's hands. Um, yeah, there's something though that I want to talk about. I want to relay a story to you. This is a story that this is something that happened to me many years ago. Well, it happened in 1983, so we're going back now. 85 would be 40 years ago, so we're going back 42 years for this story. I was 15 years old in 1983, and I've told you before that I was locked up. I was in a reformatory for 7 months of that year, labeled incorrigible, and that goes back to an incident where my stepmother pulled a butcher knife on me and chased me out of the building because I was going to Mass. I put my suit on and I was going out the door to Mass, and she didn't like Catholics and Catholic Church and so on. And so she chased me out of there with a butcher knife onto the street. And I ended up going to jail ultimately because of that. But anyway, while I was locked up, I found different ways to escape in my mind. And the people running the place knew what I was doing. And one of the things they did is they barred me from reading. They forbade me to read anything because I'd become a voracious reader. Because they said that I was basically doing the equivalent of escaping. And they wanted me to be constantly aware of where I was, you know, basically. Which, of course, run and cross purposes to my agenda, which was to forget where I was for a little while by reading. Anyway, I had become a voracious reader, and then I was forbidden to read. But, um, yeah, weird stuff, I know. Anyway, at one point, because I was reading anything I could get my hands on, and at one point I was reading a newspaper. And there was a very short story in the paper. It was just a paragraph long. And I remember it. I never forgot this story because it was such a weird story that I just never forgot it. Anyway, the story was about a ship that had appeared in New York Harbor. And when I mean appeared, I mean appeared. It appeared out of nowhere. It was a ship called the USS Eldridge. Now, bear in mind, I read this story in 1983 when the ship appeared. It was like the day after or whatever that the ship had appeared, or maybe a few days after, I don't know. But it was printed in the newspaper anyway, and I read the story. So it was current events at the time. The USS Eldridge. Now, people saw it. People even took photographs of it. People that were on other ships took photographs because they couldn't believe it. This ship just appeared. It literally materialized out of nowhere right before their eyes. And it sat there for a while, and then it disappeared. It just vanished. Now, the USS Eldridge was a real ship, but by 1983, the USS Eldridge no longer existed. It had been scrapped. It was a World War II ship, is what it was. It belonged to the U.S. Navy, and it was a World War II ship. And they had done an experiment on there that involved electrically charging the hull of the ship. I don't understand it exactly, but the idea was that it would make it invisible. It would make it, I don't know if it would make it invisible to the naked eye or just invisible to enemy radar or whatever they used to detect ships. There was whatever technology they had. But the idea was that the Germans wouldn't know the ship was there. So, the ship could be there, the Germans would not know. And like I say, I don't know if it was supposed to make it invisible to the naked eye or invisible to technology or possibly invisible to both. I don't know that. But what I do know is that it was some sort of invisibility is what they were going for, some sort of a way to make the ship undetectable. Which of course would give you quite an edge. If you could do that with your fleet of ships in wartime, imagine being able to sneak up on the enemy, and the enemy don't know you're there. You can get right into position to do whatever you need to do, and the enemy have no idea. You have no idea you're even there. And how are they going to fire back at you? They don't even know where you are. They can't see it, they would not be able to explain it. What just shot us, or what just hurled a torpedo at us, or whatever, we don't know. There's nothing there, but the damage is here. So anyway, so it was kind of a good idea if it worked. Now what happened is a horror show. Apparently, and I found this out years and years later, actually after I got on the internet, because there were people. Well, there was one man in particular who had claimed to have been on the USS Eldridge when these experiments took place. Now, he claimed to have time traveled into the distant future. One of the things that was said, though, one of the things he said is that they time traveled to 1983. And they were in 1983 briefly, and then they came out of 1983. But then at some point after that, he time traveled, he claimed, into the distant future. Like, I don't know exactly how far along, but like centuries ahead, basically. Of where we were in the 1940s, or even where we are now. Nearly 100 years later. 80 years later or whatever. But here's the thing. I read that story about that ship in 1983. This was before anybody was talking about these experiments or anything. And it was just a story written about how the ship had appeared and then disappeared, and it was a ship that shouldn't exist anymore. The ship was supposed to be not even a thing anymore. It was supposed to be gone. It was supposed to have been scrapped years and years before 1983. So by 1983, that ship had already not existed for a long time. And yet it appeared real as anything in New York Harbor. Now, the story goes that when the ship returned to the 1940s, some of the men had been absorbed into the superstructure of the ship. They had basically become a part of the ship and whatnot, and it was a real horror show anyway, that these guys were now melded into the ship, and apparently it was really horrendous anyway. But apparently, too, what they did is they somehow time traveled. This is the claim that was made anyway. Many years later, like many years after 1983, this claim was made. All I can tell you is I read about it when it happened, when the ship was supposed to have appeared in New York Harbor, in New York City, and in 1983, when it was current news. And the story didn't offer any explanation. It didn't postulate as to why or anything like that, or it didn't say why. It just said this happened, and there are witnesses to it. And people have taken photographs of it, and so on. I can't recall if there was a photograph in the story or not. I don't think there was. I think it was just like a paragraph of text, of typewritten words, But anyway, I do remember that. I remember reading about that. So years later, when this guy who had been on the ship started talking, or claimed that he had been on the ship anyway, I'll say he claimed because I don't know. Really, I don't know what's true and what isn't with this story. I only know that I had read the story about the ship appearing many years before I heard this guy talk. Anyway, he claimed that he had been one of the ones on the ship and that he had time traveled and so on. Yeah, like I say, I don't know. It's just interesting, that's all. I find it interesting. And, it's just one of those little tidbits of information that comes your way sometimes over the course of a lifetime, and you read it, and you find it kind of fascinating, and you really want to know more, but there isn't any more. And it was 1983, so what you saw is what you got. What was written there in the newspaper, that's what you got, and you didn't get any more or any less than that. So I got what they offered, I got what they claimed they knew, and that was it. So I really don't know. But I can tell you, the story did fascinate me. And I wondered about it. And then I just kind of put it into the back of my head and went about my business for decades. Didn't really think about it for decades until I saw videos on YouTube of that old man talking and claiming that he had time traveled as a result of these cloaking experiments that were being done on the USS Eldridge. Anyway, people who saw the ship appear in New York City saw the name USS Eldridge on the ship, so that's how they knew it was the USS Eldridge, even though the USS Eldridge no longer existed at that time. All right, that's it. Just a freaky story, that's all. We'll see you later. There's Rocky. There he is. Isn't he beautiful? He doesn't like that red bandage. You don't like any bandages, though. You're very fashionable, Rocky. You are. You should be grateful for your red bandage there. It looks pretty sharp. Anyway, that's it for now. He's going to set a fashion trend yet. You just watch and see. Okay, bye for now.